When did sex become so adventurous? Hello, my name is Yarim Helom, and I'll be talking to you about Victorian era England versus US today, perceptions of premarital sex and sex. So, where did we start? Victorian era England is from 1832 to 1901 with Queen Victoria in rule. So, sex was only done with your husband, and premarital sex was completely frowned upon. Prostitution was absolutely feared and viewed as evil or impure, and masturbation was a huge no no. Masturbation was thought to lead to mental illnesses and even be the cause of some really weird things. So, if you were fat or pale or sick, you might have been accused of masturbating. Sometimes this could lead to cutting off of the penis or clitoris. In order to prevent masturbation devices came about. Now, these are a ring, as viewed in the picture, with metal teeth around them. At the top, you can see that they were able to tighten, and essentially, they were used to prevent any erection. So, males were given these devices to prevent masturbation, and they were placed and used in the Victorian era. What was sex actually like in those days? Well, like I mentioned before, sex was completely discouraged at any means. Even when you were married, you were not really looking forward to having sex with your significant other. When women would become engaged or growing up, mothers and other women would give them tips as to how to avoid sexual encounters with their husbands once they were married. Excuses such as headaches, bathroom, or even arguing would be given to young women in order to avoid sex at any cost. Young women were told if you were to get into an argument with your husband right before supper, you guys would be angry with each other. Therefore, once he would want to be intimate at night, it would be avoided since you guys had just argued. There are also proper ways in which you would kiss in the Victorian era. The cheek or the forehead were all acceptable, but if your husband tried to kiss you on the lips, you were expected to turn your cheek and allow him to kiss your cheek. Once you were married and sexual intercourse did take place, there was this rule: you were only allowed to have sex twice a week in the Victorian era, which was really interesting. And not only were you only allowed to have sex twice, but there was no skin exposure. So women would have sex with their gowns on or lifted, so minimal exposure. Men would be clothed as well, which is completely different from our modern day media representation of what sex is like without clothes and the grabbing. So very different. That brings us to today. What is our perception, millennials, US today, perceptions of premarital sex? As you must know, we absolutely accept premarital sex. It's become a norm for us. It is now accepted. Adolescents as young as 13 are now engaging in premarital sex activities. According to Armstrong, our article that we read this quarter, hooking up is really seen as a positive way now. It gives you the ability to stay focused in school. It allows you to meet other people, not be tied down in a relationship. It does have some negative consequences, but the negative consequences outweigh those consequences that you would have if you were to get out of a relationship. So Armstrong really brings to light some of the positive aspects of college hookups and why it is now more popular to have these one-night stands or these friends with benefits, as you would say, instead of being committed in a relationship throughout your college experience. So when did this shift occur? This change occurred in the baby boomer generation, and more specifically between 1960 and 1970, which is post-World War II, which is actually a sexual revolution. We became more accepting of people having sex with people that they loved rather than people that they were going to get married. The number of babies that were born out of wedlock was also going up at this time. Why did we change our views? There's a couple of reasons why our perceptions of premarital sex and sex changed. cohort replacement, divorce rates, birth control media. These are all aspects and factors that have input as to why our perceptions changed. One that was discussed in our quarter specifically was the media. In the research that I found, it showed that adolescents that watched high levels of sexual content were actually more likely to engage in sexual activity than someone that was watching less sexual content on television or on the internet. So these are all reasons why our perceptions changed. Birth control made it a possibility to have sex without the risk of getting pregnant, as well as condoms. So these factors made our perception of sex less dangerous and more desirable. Cohort replacement's another reason. As generation goes out, a new generation comes in, which means we get new perspective. We get new people bringing in new ideas and perspectives changing. As the same time, divorce rates were going up, so the idea of being married to one person for the rest of your life was also changing. It was becoming more accepted to have failed marriages, which means more sexual partners. England and US today, is there any overlap? And the answer is yes. There is some overlap, but not a whole lot. The differences are masturbation. One, and clearly, is that we no longer view masturbation as a cause of mental illness. We do not believe that because you are fat or pale or sick, it's due to masturbation. That's quite comic once you think about it. The treatment of children that are born out of wedlock has completely changed. We no longer kill children, that are born out of wedlock. We do not isolate them from society. We do not treat them any differently than you would treat any other person. Sexual intercourse is no longer taken place twice a week by a husband and a wife. There's no rule as to how many times you should or shouldn't engage in sexual intercourse with your significant other. And this perception of minimal clothing or minimal skin exposure in the Victorian era has completely just disappeared. And I think that has a lot to do with media. In a film I watched just last week from our class, Love and Basketball, there's a hot scene where they start engaging in sexual intercourse, and he pulls out a condom, asks her if she is okay, but you see them completely naked, shirtless, what gives them the perception that they are naked. So we get the idea that we should be unclothed from the media, which I think is really important to note. Some of the similarities are our age of being married. So in US today, the average age is 28. And in the Victorian era in England, it was 28 as well, which I think is really interesting. Before I did this paper, my perception would be, or was, that in Victorian era, women would be married young as 14. And although that was the case in some marriages, I found that it was more common to be married older, and this was in large part to do with the wealthy society. The wealthy society then believed that you would wait to be married or wait to be wed. Another similarity to reading about the Victorian era perception of premarital sex and sex is the stereotype of men being so sexually motivated humans. This still exists today in society. Men are portrayed to be these sexually motivated humans that all they think about is sex and all they want is sex, and they're the ones to first engage in sex. And this really hasn't changed. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.